Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another CSRM podcast. My name is Dan Stoffer, and I'm the Director of Church Relations with CSRM. And today we're excited to interview both Dr. Greg Linville and PF Myers, as they are authors of some new books that we want to highlight here. And we're just excited to have you both. And so, guys, if you would say hello real quick.
Hey, everybody. Great to be on. Thanks for this opportunity. Looking forward.
Yes, thank you.
Many of you probably already know we have our own publishing house. It's Overwhelming Victory Press, and very recently some new books have come out and been published, and so that's what we're going to kind of talk about here during our time together. Greg, if you don't mind, could you give us a quick overview of the series of these most recent books?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for doing this. The Overwhelming Victory Press is the publishing arm of CSRM, Church Sports Recreation Ministers, and it is primarily functioning in two ways. One is actually producing, publishing books, and also with a regular weekly blog. And at this point, we've got years of archived blogs, and they are on various topics that sports ministers and volunteers in the local church who are doing sports ministry can grab hold of. It's archived in terms of topic and different ways. But again, today we're primarily focusing on our publishing house and what we do with the books. And we'll be just excited to know that we've already, in 2020, we've published 4 books already. And we have at least one more that we think is going to come out by the end of the year. And we have, a number of years ago, the CSRM Board of Trustees commissioned us to write a series of books that was originally envisioned to be about 12 volumes. And we now are in the midst of writing the 6th one. 5 are in print already. And I have a good feeling that it's going to grow beyond the 12. I don't know how many more, a couple more, maybe a half a dozen, but the idea of it all is to help the local church, as well as that sports-related paraministry world, our brothers and sisters that are serving with Fellowship of Christian Athletes or Athletes in Action or anything, that's kind of got an A in its name, dealing with athletes, that sports ministry. We really want to help them in 3 basic areas. The first one would be, how do we think? What do we believe? It's that theological truth that everything is based on. It's how we would envision what we do. And then, so some of the books are on that, some of the deep theological parts of the sports and rec and fitness ministry. And then there's that second group that is the philosophy. What from what we believe and what we think and how we envision. When do we do this? How do we do it? Where do we do it? And kind of some overarching administrative and organizational things. And then the main thrust is, out of all of that emerges the top level, so to speak, or the end level, and that's, what do we actually do? How do we run a league? How do we do an event? All that kind of stuff. So Overwhelming Victory Press is producing books that do all of those things.
I think that captures well just the heart of CSRM. We want to just make sure we have resources out there to help the sports minister, to help the local church.
That's right.
And these are great resources here. I should have said at the very front, it's obvious we're not all together. Many of us are still going through the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're still in a little bit of a lockdown here. So you might hear some background noise, but I know our content can still get out there. Let's switch gears here just a little bit. Let's talk to one of our authors. PF Myers is on the call here. And so PF, if you would quickly talk about your role and then tell us about the interesting title of your book.
Yeah, well, again, it's great to be here. So I am the International Director for CSRM, and I am humbled and privileged to have that opportunity. We have between 15 and 20 international staff and what we call global network partners, GNPs, who are working in countries around the world to establish a church sports ministry movement in their own country by training and empowering and equipping local churches to change lives through sports outreach. And so it's amazing to be a part of what God is doing as we work to empower the local indigenous churches worldwide to become relevant in their community through the tool of sports, recreation, and fitness. And so my experience is, well, quite varied. I've had the opportunity to travel to somewhere between 80 and 90 countries to train local leaders in their own communities, in their own settings. And I actually grew up in a small rural community in the South in the U.S. I was not a professional athlete. I tried to make the basketball team in my junior high and high school for 5 years in a row, and I was cut every year from the team, but that did not diminish my love for sports. I always enjoyed playing sports, watching sports, reading about sports, rooting on my favorite teams. But then when I was in college, I had the opportunity for the first time to go into an inner city setting, to an inner city gym, and organize basketball programs for the community. And that was the first taste I got of being able to see how sports could be used to build relationships in different settings, in different communities, even in different cultures, and the impact that could have as you build relationships to share the gospel and make disciples, what we now call evangelistic disciple making. And so I was able to then get involved in sports ministry at different levels. First of all, in rural Mississippi, running a program there that was para-ministry based, although largely supported by a local church. Then to the west coasts of the U.S. to run a more middle-class suburban sports program where I became the director. Through that, then I met our good friend Roger Oswald, and he mentored and coached me, and God opened the door that then took me to Europe to work with a large sports ministry there, ultimately then around the world. And I just couldn't, I guess, keep to myself all that God has been showing me over the years. I never thought I would write a book. I call myself an accidental author. So I didn't sit down and start at chapter 1 and go through to chapter 12 or through the end. But the book is more of a culmination of what I have learned and experienced in my own practical experience of running a sports ministry on the front lines, on the ground for probably about 15 years or so in all those different settings, in the rural community, inner city, suburban, international, all those settings combined. There are principles that God showed me. And so then a number of years ago, I started training others, training pastors how to do this, which became a manual, training manual and workbook. And so I was teaching this, and all the stories started coming of how God was using those principles. And I thought it would be good to turn that workbook and manual into a book and share out of that book some of the stories of the success. And back in 2000, when I was starting to work more internationally with Roger Oswald, I had a chance to go to Latvia, and I was supposed to be speaking to a soccer team. And I didn't want to just stand up and share my testimony, although I know that's good, but I was really praying, Lord, give me something creative, a creative way to share the gospel. And he gave me this image of our lives being like a shoe, that our shoes are empty, they're created for a purpose, they look beautiful on the outside, but inside they're kind of empty and smelly and even stinky. Well, that's a lot like our lives, that we might look beautiful on the outside, but inside we're smelly and stinky. And in the same way then that the foot has to come into the shoe for it to realize its purpose, and then it can run and jump, Jesus has to come into our lives and fill us and take away that stinkiness, the sin, and give us forgiveness and love and his grace. And so I shared this analogy, which what I now call a sports parable. And we saw a number of the players come to faith. And so now I've shared that analogy all over the world. But when I was in Europe in 2012, one of my colleagues said, "Hey, PF, you're going to write a book one day." And I was like, "No, I don't think so. Probably not." But then I said, "But if I do, I know what the title is going to be. It's going to be The Life of the Shoe because of this parable." And he was like, "Oh, okay, well, I'll wait for it." So then as I was, processing what to do and getting this vision, that title has always stuck with me, The Life of the Shoe, Sports Outreach for the World. And so it's really a story of my life, my testimony intertwined with these concepts and principles of sports ministry that I've taught and around the world that I've seen so effective and useful. So maybe that's a little bit of a longer answer, but but it gives you a little more of the full picture in the background too.
I think it's a great answer, and I love that illustration of the shoe and what that can teach us there. And I think that you explained that well. My next question is twofold. Number one, why aren't we seeing you right now, PF? I think it'd be good for you to explain that. And then secondly, for anybody interested in sports ministry, maybe as a missionary, maybe here in the United States, maybe they're on staff, maybe they're volunteering, why should they get this book? So why can't we see you, and why should someone get this book?
And I've got a question for him too. Don't you know how many staff you have? You gave us a range. I mean, is that because it's a moving target or what?
Yeah. So okay, I'll start with Dan's question first, then I'll come back to Greg's. The reason you're not seeing me is because I don't want to scare you away. But no, seriously, it's because of our work in very sensitive countries. I want to protect my identity because of the people that I work with, because if I am exposed, then potentially they could also become exposed. And when I talk about sensitive countries, it's countries where we have a lot of challenges for the Christians. They're facing persecution from their government. They're facing difficulties in their community and their culture. And so my disguising or covering my identity is in order to protect them, and also some of the sources in the book, some of the stories I tell in the book, the names have been changed because of that very reason. Because if it was found out who they are, then they could be in danger. And so it's not because I don't want to be held accountable for the stories, or because I don't want to take the credit for the stories, although all the glory and honor goes to God. So you can give him all the credit, and I praise him for that. But it's because of the work that I do in those sensitive countries that it's important that I remain a little bit anonymous with my picture. And the reason that I give a varying number is because it is a kind of a moving target. We've just added recently a new global network partner in another country. And incidentally, you can actually go to the CSRM website and you can see the profiles of many of our GMPs, although again, you'll notice that in some cases we only list a specific area of the world. And that's again for security reasons. So 15 to 20, it's hard for me to keep up with it. We're actually interviewing a couple more guys in the next week to become global network partners. And then we have some who are more loosely affiliated with us than others. And so their designation kind of changes a little bit. So, you know, it sounds a little bit odd, but I don't always have the specific number. So it's generally a range. But in addition to what I do with CSRM, I also work with another organization called Uttermost Sports. And for CSRM, I'm the international director. For Uttermost Sports, I'm a mobilizer, recruiter, and trainer. And for people who live in farming country, I have to make a distinction. It's Uttermost Sports, not Uttermost Sports. You know, uttermost is from Acts 1:8, where Jesus said to the disciples, go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. And so we're mobilizing people to go into what we call the 1040 window. The 1040 window are lines of latitude on the map 10 and 40, where there's the most persecution in the world. So it's North Africa, Middle East, all the way across to Central Asia, Asia, and on all the way, even Indonesia is included, even though it's a little bit further south. But in this region, you've got 2/3 of the world's population, but 90% of these people have never heard the gospel, and they have no relevant witness of the gospel, even in their own communities. And so, again, that goes back to the need to be a little bit more particular about the security risks and the precautions that we take, because we have roughly 65 reps working in 20 countries throughout the 1040 window. And so a lot of what I do combines my connections with and my role with CSRM also to serve through Uttermost Sports. And so, but all of this comes out in my book too. So I talk about both organizations in the back when I list ministries that I recommend, and all of these stories that I share and the principles that I teach have come out as I've worked through both organizations. And so then why should someone interested in sports ministry internationally buy this book? Well, I just, it's not from a theoretical standpoint entirely. It's from practical experience. I know that these principles work because first of all, I've done them in my own ministry. As I said, I was involved in frontline sports ministry, doing it for 15 years. And so these principles come out of my direct experience. So I know they work. And then second of all, now that I've been training internationally for a number of years, I've seen others take these principles and also apply them and use them in their ministry. But beyond just the sports ministry aspect of it, I always tell people, I say, these are sports ministry, or these are ministry principles in a sports jersey. Because it's all based on Scripture. It's based on our CSRM three-tier paradigm of theological truths, philosophical principles, methodological models. And it focuses on the top two, theology and philosophy, which then leads to a proper methodology. And the methodology is what we do. And in sports ministry, we like to go and we like to do without really thinking why we're doing what we're doing, because we just like to have fun. Well, we work with the pastors, church leaders, and sports people to say, hey, what does God think about all this, and what does the scripture and what does the Bible say about it? And then why are we doing what we're doing? Is it just for fun, or is it truly for evangelistic discipleship? And then out of that comes the proper method. And so the principles are so practical and so relevant for anybody in ministry, but yes, particularly for someone interested in sports, recreation, and fitness ministry.
Well, there's a couple of things there that we can definitely pull from. Number one, this sounds like a fantastic resource for anybody who wants to take the gospel to the world. You know, Jesus called us to go and do that, and this is a great resource on some creative ways to go ahead and do that, and just the stories. And then PF, I think the most important thing that you just shared was that we need to make sure that we clarify it is uttermost sports ministry, right? So
exactly.
clarifying that. So, well, friends, that is all the time we have for this podcast. You'll get to hear some more about this in our next podcast. Really quickly, I just want to encourage you where you can find this resource as well as some of the other ones through our publishing house. We just encourage you to go to csrm.org, and right there on our website, you can order these books, or through Amazon. You can search these books out, and you can find them right there. They're also available via Kindle, and by the end of the summer, all of these books will be available on Kindle as well. So that's all the time we have for right now. We really appreciate both Greg and PF Myers joining us here today on this podcast. Thanks, guys.